off to the races. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Guy McPherson here. Today, I am very excited to have as my guest, Judy Weaver. Judy, welcome.
Hi, Guy. Thanks for having me.
All right. So Judy is one of the co-founders of Connected Warriors, whose ambition is to elevate the warriors in our community by engaging them in a process of healing, growth, and change in ways that benefit themselves, their families, and the community. Judy is a yoga teacher living in South Florida who has gained wide recognition for her unique ability to guide her teachers and students to achieve their full potential. In 2007, Judy met Beau MacVane, a strapping Army Ranger who, after returning home from his 5th tour of duty in Iraq, contracted ALS. I'm not going to even say that right now, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. Beau asked Judy to teach him yoga so he could stay as strong and connected to his body as humanly possible as he fought his terminal illness. Over the next several years, Judy watched in awe as Beau was able to use her instruction and his determination to battle the decline of his physical body. What arose was a mental focus and a self-awareness that changed them both. When Beau passed away, surrounded by his loving family and friends, he left with a peace of mind more powerful than any physical limitation. Judy's passion in offering her skill to the military is dedicated to the warrior spirit of Beau MacVane and his family. Wow. Man, heavy.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So Beau walked into the studio in Boca. I teach in Boca. And I was really just kind of early on in my yoga therapy path. I didn't do the traditional route through a curriculum through a school. And he was the most, I have a thing I wrote about him, and I say in there, he was the bravest person I've ever known. And primarily because he knew the outcome.
Right.
Where this was going, and he faced every day with a smile until he really couldn't smile anymore, and his spirit was so strong. As an Army Ranger, and the house in Boca had a really big backyard, and he actually, as he was just starting with the disease, he had set up a zip line, and he put himself in his harness, his parachute harness, and he would walk from one end of the yard to the other end. And just for me to see that spirit and to see him be okay with what the outcome was, and as we were moving closer and closer to it, because we started where he came to the studio. He would drive, and then he fell, and then his mom drove him, or his dad drove him, and then he was not walking anymore, and we were doing this at his house. So going through this whole process was an amazing experience for me, and my whole role was to keep him as happy, as functional, and also with the family. And it was life-changing for sure. That was my watershed moment, from just being a yoga teacher, yoga therapist, to really changing and offering this practice to somebody who was in really need. So.
Right. Well, let's kind of come back here, but let's kind of start a little earlier. What got you here in the first place? What got you into yoga? And you said yoga therapist and so forth.
Yeah. So for me, my background was dance. My folks were professional dancers. They were significantly older. So they came out of the early 30s depression time. They were ballroom dancers, so they traveled around with Mickey Rooney and with the Mitch Miller, the big bands, and all of that. And they could not have children, so my sister and I were adopted. And we were adopted. We grew up in LA, and I was brought to dance like at 3.5 years old. And I went through that, and I knew I wasn't going to be a ballerina. That was not my thing, so I stopped. And that was like my last body movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you this, I'm adopted. And now what I know about trauma, dancing saved my life. Mm-hmm. My parents didn't know it at the time, but putting me in dance at such a young age literally saved my life, because I was adopted from South Korea. It was right after the war. I still have, and I feel the effects of the trauma on me now. I don't like dark places. Do not come up behind me and touch me, say anything. I jump, I scream. I can't be out with fireworks, so I have all those startle reactions.
Mhm.
I had anxiety when I was a youngster. I thought I was a crybaby, but I get it now. And that's the lens looking backward. So moving forward, I was in college. I took a yoga class. It was not like yoga is an asana now. And I was like, oh, this is not me. And it wasn't until in my 30s where I had contracted a bacteria, cyclospora parasite, and I was in bed for about a year and a half. My girlfriend
Wow.
came when I was feeling better. She came, she goes, you got to go to this class. And she took me to an Ashtanga yoga class. I was addicted from that moment on. And that is what moved me into this. But, I come from dance, so I'm like, okay, I get this. But when you say it's 1% theory and 99% practice, I kind of am a theory girl. And my husband is an engineer, so I've got that, here about, and I'm a geek too. So it's like, I really need to understand this.
Right,
And
right.
that's what started me down the path of, let's do a teacher training. Okay, I did that. Now let me study this, and now let me study this, and it just became, a study and of this practice.
That's a really cool story. You said,
So yeah, that's my background.
yeah, you said dance saved your life. Uh, More specifically,
Yes.
how?
So as you know, Guy, trauma is held in the cells of the body. It's a biological, a physiological event. And as we develop, and I've spent a lot of time understanding the development from in utero until we come out, there's that critical period of time where our brains aren't yet developed, our bodies are not yet developed, but at 2 years old, we have more synapses than you'll ever have in your entire life. And those are so powerful that we have them, that they stick around, enough of them, so that as we get older and we need those detours or the jumper cables, I call it,
Mhm.
you need to, oh, this pathway is not working. Let's go here. I have found that body mind practice of ballet was is such a connection to my proprioception, to my vestibular system. And because of that, it actually helped me develop beyond the trauma, which was not allowing, I think, the corpus callosum in most young, early baby trauma to develop properly. And so for me, having that literal midline crossing, having asymmetrical movements, breathing and doing that, and having that control of the physical body, as we know Bessel van der Kolk says, right? The body has to come back on board
Mm.
with trauma. And
Wow.
so that's where, in retrospect, I truly believe that saved my life.
Mm. That's really interesting. Without even you realizing it, right? I mean, you didn't even know what was going on at that time, of course, but wow, that's really cool.
I had no clue.
Wow.
I had
Wow.
no clue.
So you start,
So that started me.
yeah.
Mhm.
So you start geeking out, you start taking these teacher training, and how did things evolve such that, well, what happened? What happened when you started doing that?
Well, so yeah. So I took the traditional yoga world side, and I did a 300-hour, and then I did another 200-hour with different teachers because I was fascinated. And I moved away from Ashtanga, although it's still my practice. I moved away into Iyengar because who really understands the alignment and how do you modify? And so because I came to this practice super flexible, I really realized quickly on that those that are not so flexible are really blessed. And I call them blessed with stiffness. The tendency is they don't hurt themselves as much. The tendency is they hit their edge pretty quickly and they feel it, so they get that immediate response. Me, I have to go, crazy open, and then, oh,
Right.
maybe I feel something, but I've already gone past an injury. So I really wanted to understand the functional movement of the body. How is the skeleton put together? What are those joints supposed to do? What is their job? How does the muscles, tendons, and ligaments, and how all that plays in the movement, and how we can move our skeleton in places that are maybe a little dysfunctional? Then you add on to that, because of my early on childhood trauma, I have a whole litany of autoimmune things and things like that. So then I started laying that piece on the physiological. All right, well, why is this? And how is it that my emotions, my thoughts of being stressed is affecting my belly, which is affecting then my body and the mind and how I connect to things. And so it became this huge puzzle where I would research, oh, okay, I get that. Oh, I feel this now. Now I'm going to go down and study that particular piece. So I worked a long time with a functional movement physiologist privately and with a chiropractor, because I'm such a believer that trauma, to truly heal from trauma, you really want to be able to regulate your nervous system. When you think about the healthiest people in the world are those people who can feel their status quo, so to speak, right? Or they can come back to balance, whatever that might be. And because we really operate communication within our body mind is chemical or electrical, it all plays together. And I wanted to understand, so if I lift my finger, how is that affecting anything else? Or if I think of something, how is that affecting my little finger over here? So does that make sense?
It does. It does. So did you start applying that as a teacher in your own facility, or what? How did that? What evolved? Yeah.
Yes. You know, I've been really super fortunate to have. So I never really wanted to teach. So that's the other piece. That was not my goal when I did my first teacher training. It was really to learn more about what I do in my practice, and I had time on my hands. So that was really the piece of it. So when I did come back to Florida, I had my sisters around and a couple people I knew, and I'm like, oh, you're a new yoga teacher. Let's practice. So I got to play with them and they got to be my guinea pigs. So yes, as I was learning concurrently, I was then applying it to them. And that's kind of how I learned. And my first private client, in retrospect, horrible. Me, horrible. She was great. It was like, I really didn't know what I was doing. I was trying to apply all of this technical and specific to her and disregard her goals. It was just a disaster. But I learned, right? I learned, and I'm so grateful. She still talks to me.
So how did Connected Warriors come about?
You know, so there's the Beau. Beau, he passed in 2009, no, 2010. And that year, the movie The Hurt Locker came out. I don't know if you remember it.
I do, yeah.
And so for those who didn't see it, the movie, it won the Academy Award. In fact, she was the first female director to win. And when we left the theater, so this movie is about a unit in Iraq, and their job was to defuse IEDs or bombs. That's their job. And you can imagine doing something like that really should scare you to death. The main character, the guy who that was his job to literally defuse it, he was happy-go-lucky. He was taking safety equipment on. He was making jokes. It was all fun and games. When he came home, it was a completely different story. And the scene that resonated for me was he was in the grocery store. He's walking down the cereal aisle. He's overwhelmed by too much going on, just the cereal boxes. But he hears a noise in the aisle next to him. He hits the ground, and you know he's back in Iraq. I left the theater and I turned to my husband, who happens to be an Air Force veteran, and I said, honey, that is upside down. That is wrong, and I can fix it. And that is when it came to me that, again, I come back to the nervous system, right? Self-regulation. The reality is we all want to be present in chaos and peace. It's not a one or another, it's a both, because that is life. And so after that movie, after my experience with Beau, because he had been gone for about a year, I told Jeff, I said, you know, I have to bring this. I have to bring this to the world. This practice is truly life transforming, life saving, life giving, life everything. This needs to be shared. and that's when, just in a quick history, my parents were very philanthropic. So we were brought up, my sister and I were brought up that way to give. You give, you give, you give. And so when I was in San Francisco and did my training, I started with It's Yoga. I started a program called It's Yoga Outside, and it was to bring this practice to at-risk youth. That was my first time I realized how hard it is to give something away. But I persevered, and I reached out to Ralph Iovino, a Vietnam veteran who I taught to be a yoga teacher a few years before. And I said, Ralph, you're still going to group. Will you please bring me veterans and I will teach free classes? And that's how it started.
Wow.
That was in 2010. Now, fast forward, well, take away the COVID piece, but fast forward, we were in 9 countries, 26 states. We have an MOA with the VA for providing yoga programming. We just finished a pilot program to do online classes with them. We had 175 classes a week. And I ran around the country for several years teaching teachers free of charge. I take no compensation for this. And we were seeing over 2,000 visits a week just from those classes. We're in 16 active duty military installations, and we're in 35 VAs and vet centers.
Oh my God.
And our teachers, I would say 98% of our teachers volunteer their time.
So is Connected Warriors a nonprofit?
It is. It is.
Okay.
And we're really, yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
We're really excited. This year, we're opening up a brick and mortar behavioral health center. And we're so excited to be able to do that.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing with these warriors. Are the people coming, do they have to be veterans? Do they have to be enlisted people? Or
So we're open to active duty military service members, military veterans, their family members, and active duty family members. And we added first responders a year and a half ago. So if you're a first responder and or a family member, you're welcome to come to our classes. You can't come to the classes on the military bases, but you can come to the classes in the community. And when we say family members, we don't mean that you have to be related.
mm-hmm.
It's your inner circle.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I realized with our military population is if you think about the rise of suicides in the military world compared to the civilian world, the numbers are staggering. When you look at the PTS, the depression rates in the military compared to civilian world, it's quite significant. And then you've got this whole new it's not new, sadly, but military sexual trauma that is now out in the more public eye. Those numbers are just horrific. And all of that together with whomever you choose as your group, your people can come to the classes. And honestly, we don't ask for a DD 214. We don't ask for proof at all, because if you really are wanting to come that badly, you probably need the class, mm-hmm. and the veterans will out them. Mm-hmm. I don't need to do anything. Mm-hmm. They will out them, and it's not a bad thing, though. Mm-hmm. It's the reality. When I said this initially to the board, I told them, I said, wherever a veteran, active duty, family member, and a yoga teacher is, we'll be there. And we changed our vision statement to really reflect that a few years ago. We changed it from that's on maths pretty much to helping the world feel better one breath at a time, because it is, we're all in this together. Right. And I think Sebastian Younger,
whether we realize it or not.
Exactly. And what I see is kind of and I probably you'll probably get some feedback on this, but I see COVID from a perspective of the world population in understanding dealing with this pandemic. They really get a taste of what it is like living in chronic vigilance. Mm-hmm. And the worst thing about the pandemic compared to even a warfighter is that a warfighter has a mission, and there's an end to it. They have a deployment. There's a fixed date. We're sitting here, the world, in this pandemic. We have no date. We have no end. We trust that it's going to end with the vaccine and all of that. but we're still all sitting here on edge. So we're living that sensation of that vigilance, that it's just that chronic low hum of stress added to the other life stress and added to, everything else about what this pandemic has created for us. So in a really sick kind of way, it's a view through a lens that most civilians don't ever see what our service members kind of deal with. And so Sebastian Junger in Vanity Fair in May 2005, I believe, and that may not be the right date, but he wrote that our military members are not committing suicide from the trauma from combat. They're killing themselves from the trauma of coming home. And when you look at the civilian gap, and I'll give you a quick stat, 1947, after World War II, 45% of every household had somebody actively serving. So that really kind of translates into 100% of the US population was involved in the war effort. If you look at 2017, less than 1% of every household had somebody actively serving.
Wow.
No one knows. Right. They don't know. They don't feel it. And then there's this whole military side of understanding the military demographic, their dynamics, their world, their culture that is so different than the civilian world. And we're asking them to step back into the civilian world without giving them the tools to downregulate themselves. And that was really the piece and why I'm like, they need us. They need yoga. And you can imagine that concept of here's yoga, here's the DOD. How are we going to even communicate? And I'll be honest, I'm so grateful for all of the effort of everybody who has supported Connected Warriors, because we have literally changed that dialogue. They reach out to us. They reach out literally to us. We have chaplains, we have heads of special operations. They reach out and say, hey, how do we get a class? And then there's the whole statistical part of it. And I knew early on that in order to get the military to believe in this thing was we have to be evidence-based. So we're so fortunate. We have 2 studies that have been published. We're working on another one right now that's in the midst of their, moving through the process. And I've got a couple of others on deck to hopefully, look at different perspectives in trauma conscious yoga. So,
wow. I mean, it sounds like,
it's
just to learn how you created what you've created would be a whole nother podcast episode. I mean, it sounds fascinating to me. But let me ask you something, Judy, kind of as we wind down here. Do you see shifts in terms of how warriors or military personnel are managing and dealing with the stress in general? Are people,
yes.
the military personnel? Yeah.
Yes, I do. When you have special operators in the military talk about this practice, and it kind of gives everybody else the okay, that I'm not going to look like, especially, and it's 90% men, so I'll go there, they're not going to look like wussies, so to speak, doing something that's considered typically a female thing, that you have to be flexible and all of this other stuff. And the most important part is, it's kind of what we've done. We dropped the D way at the beginning. So when a military member understands that this is a natural biological occurrence from trauma, we all get it, they're not special, it changes their mindset about what this practice is about. And then I take the correlation, I can correlate the 8 limbs directly to the military, and I can have that conversation. And that's what I figured out what I needed to do. So yes, they're embracing it a lot more, and the military is providing the services. That's, I think, more important. I do have to do a couple of things. So the stigma of yoga, because there is that stigma in the world about it. So I made it an acronym: your own growth and awareness.
Nice.
Who can fight that? Right? Who can fight that? No one. And so that was, part of them. My big thing is I meet people where they are. And so from the military perspective, you meet them where they are. And you never think anybody's broken, because no one's broken. We all just need a little tweak here or there. We need to reconnect to something. My own business, I call it body-mind recalibration. And I put the body mind as one word because it's not separate. You can't have physical health without mental health, and you can't have mental health without physical health. So why are we calling it two separate things? The stigma of mental health is silly, because then you might as well say you have bad physical health, because it's not different. It's in the same container. This is a bio machine, and it operates, very similar to a computer. And if you kind of approach it that way and know that there's other stuff, but that's kind of my thing, is I try to bring this what we do to a place that anyone can understand.
So it's one thing to provide a treatment for these warriors when they have PTS after the fact.
Right.
Where are you in terms of, and you said, you're in dialogue with the DOD. How is this becoming part of their training, or you know what I'm saying?
So we're working to approach it with post-traumatic growth. That's one piece. I'm working to get into DOD at West Point, Annapolis, Air Force Academy. My big thing, and that's my own personal, is the ROTCs, because a huge amount of our officers come from ROTC programs. And so we can start as early in high school, which is what I was doing here in Boca. Commander Bingham, he's a 22-year fighter pilot, retired Navy, and 22 years he started the ROTC program in Boca. And until he brought yoga to his program, they never were the national champions. The year he brought yoga, they became national champions. And so part of that, I have two of his students who are now in fighter pilot training. And one for sure, she told me that and she still practices on her own. She said the pranayama practices that I taught them, she used, and that's what helped her in the fighter pilot training through the centrifugal exercises. She said otherwise she doesn't know how she would have survived. So I have that. I try to work from the high end and the low end at the same time. So I go in at the clinician level, I go in at the volunteer level. At the same time, let me get to the medical director or the base commander, whatever I need to do, because you just have to have that dialogue. Right. They need to hear from a few retirees, some special ops, what it did for them, how it benefited them. And my big push, guys, really to have them understand that if we keep our military members in tip-top shape all the way around, not only will they be better warfighters, they will have less expenses on the back end on medical care. Wow. So that I try to bring it to the practical level. And if we think about it in the bigger picture in the United States, imagine if everybody practiced this, or even if you just take that one segment, because that one segment is 100 million people. That's a third of our population, just your military members and their families. That is a third of our US population. It's a big number. If we can provide them this, imagine the benefits in the community, because we know this all spreads. And it would reduce, out of our taxpayer dollars, it would reduce the cost of insurance. It would reduce the cost of healthcare.
All right, Judy, this is amazing, and you are amazing. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
You can reach me at Connected Warriors, Judy, Judy, at connectedwarriors.org. And that's probably the easiest way of getting a hold of me. My own personal website, don't do that. Just reach me at Connected Warriors. That's the best thing to do.
Okay. And
yeah.
We'll have that linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. In terms of any go-to book recommendations, what do you have for us? Whether whether trauma related or yoga related or not.
Yeah. So this is neither of those related, believe it or not. This book, when I read it, I'm like, why did I never read this before? It literally changed my life. So, right? Yeah. Who moved my cheese?
Okay.
Who moved my cheese? I have to tell you, this book will take you no time to read. It basically is, it's a conversation about living life. And my takeaway is, what do you do if you're not afraid? Because fear is at the basis of everything we do or do not do.
Right.
So what do you do when you're not afraid? And
Wow.
that's where this book will help you see where you are. And then it gives you kind of a pathway of getting to that place of what would you do if you weren't afraid?
I love that question. And it's so exciting to me. And I definitely do have fears, man. I'm going to get that book. When we hang up, I'm going to get that book. How did you pick up the book? Did someone turn you onto it, or?
My husband gave it to me. I have no idea where he was told about it. I don't know. I ought to ask him. I didn't ask him.
I was just curious.
And he's like, Judy, and he didn't give me the book. So in the book, they give you a DVD or something, and then they give you this like bookmark. He gave me the bookmark, and I'm reading the bookmark, and there's like some highlights, and I'm like, this is really fascinating. Let me have that book. And he's like, all right, here. And I read it. I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. And then I gave it to all my staff, and who knows if they read it, but I gave it to all my staff. I give it to all my people.
Nice,
We'll
nice.
see.
Awesome.
But it changed my world.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on here today. And really what you're doing is so needed and so inspiring. And this is why I have this podcast, because I get to speak with people like you. So thank you so much.
I know, that's exciting. Thank you, Guy. And thank you for having me on. I'm happy to come talk any other time you would like.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.